The first time Alaric Vance saw his children move, he thought it was a trick of the light. For 3 long years, the nursery had been a silent room of stillness, where time seemed to hold its breath and refuse to move forward. The curtains were always drawn halfway, letting in soft daylight that painted pale streaks across 3 small beds lined in perfect symmetry. Machines hummed quietly, doctors came and went, and hope, once vibrant, had faded into something fragile, something barely alive. And then, on an ordinary morning that began like every other, he saw something impossible. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of small acts to change lives, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Only Kindness. Your support helps these stories reach hearts that need them the most. Alaric Vance was a man the world admired and feared in equal measure. At just 42, he had built an empire from nothing: steel, logistics, technology, all bearing his name. People spoke of him as if he were untouchable, a man who bent reality to his will. But behind the polished glass towers and boardroom victories lived a father who had not heard his children laugh in 3 years. The accident had taken everything. It had been a bright afternoon then too, much like this one. A sudden brake failure, a violent crash, the shattering of glass and certainty. His wife had not survived. His triplets, 2 boys and a girl, had been pulled from the wreckage alive, but not truly living. Their bodies healed, but their minds retreated into a silence no doctor could reach. They lay still, eyes sometimes open, sometimes closed, but never truly present. Since that day, Alaric had tried everything money could buy. Specialists flew in from across continents. Experimental treatments were attempted. Therapists, neurologists, spiritual healers, none could bring his children back. Eventually, hope became a quiet ritual rather than a belief. He visited them every morning, stood by their beds, spoke to them even when there was no response, and left for work with a hollow ache that never quite dulled. The staff at the mansion rotated constantly. Caretakers came with polished resumes and left within weeks, unable to endure the heavy silence that filled the nursery. Some tried too hard, others too little. None made a difference, until the day Alara arrived. She did not look like someone who belonged in Alaric's world. She was young, perhaps 26, with simple clothes and tired but kind eyes. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, nothing that suggested she would succeed where dozens had failed. Alaric had barely glanced at her file. Another caretaker, another attempt. He signed the papers, gave minimal instructions, and returned to his endless cycle of work and grief. But Alara saw something different the moment she stepped into the nursery. She did not see 3 unresponsive children. She saw 3 lives paused mid-story. That first day, instead of adjusting machines or checking charts immediately, she stood quietly between the beds, sunlight falling gently across her face. The room felt heavy, but she didn't shrink from it. She walked to the windows and pulled the curtains open wider, letting the morning pour in fully for the first time in months. The light touched the children's faces differently then, warmer, almost alive. Alara began her work in small, almost invisible ways. She spoke to them constantly, not in clinical tones but in soft, ordinary conversation, as if they were simply quiet children who needed time to answer. She described the weather, the birds outside, the smell of breakfast drifting from the kitchen. She read stories aloud, her voice rising and falling with emotion, bringing life into a room that had forgotten what life sounded like. She played gentle music, not the sterile therapeutic sounds others had used, but melodies filled with warmth and memory. Sometimes, she hummed. Most importantly, she touched them, not as patients, but as children. She held their hands, brushed their hair, adjusted their blankets with care that felt deeply human rather than mechanical. Days turned into weeks. To everyone else, nothing changed. The doctors still saw no measurable improvement. The machines still hummed. The children remained still. But Alara noticed the smallest things. A flicker in an eyelid that lasted a fraction longer than before. A finger that seemed less rigid beneath her touch. A breath that felt deeper, more deliberate. She never mentioned these observations. Not to the staff, not to Alaric. She simply continued, patient and unwavering. Alaric, meanwhile, remained distant. He visited as always, spoke as always, and left as always. He barely noticed the subtle changes in the room, the brighter light, the softer atmosphere, the quiet presence of someone who truly cared. Until one afternoon changed everything. It was a rare day when Alaric returned home early. A meeting had been cancelled, leaving an unexpected gap in his tightly controlled schedule. He wasn't sure why, but instead of retreating to his office, he found himself walking toward the nursery. The hallway felt unusually quiet, even for a place that thrived on silence. As he approached the door, he noticed it was slightly open. And then he heard something. A voice, soft, melodic, filled with warmth. Alara. He paused, curiosity mingled with something unfamiliar, a faint stirring of emotion he had long buried. He stepped closer, careful not to make a sound, and looked through the narrow opening. What he saw made him freeze. Alara was not standing at a distance as most caretakers did. She was sitting on the floor between the 3 beds, sunlight surrounding her like a gentle halo. One of the boys lay closest to her, and she was holding his hand, her fingers wrapped around his as if anchoring him to the world. She was telling a story. Not reading from a book, but creating one, about 3 brave explorers who had gotten lost in a quiet, enchanted forest. Her voice carried emotion, humor, and hope, weaving a tale that felt alive in the stillness of the room. As she spoke, she leaned closer, her voice softening. And then it happened. The boy's finger moved. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight curl, a tiny shift against her hand. But it was movement. Alaric's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he thought his eyes were deceiving him. He blinked, leaned closer, heart pounding with a force he hadn't felt in years. The finger moved again. Alara didn't react with shock or panic. Instead, her expression softened, as if she had been expecting this all along. She continued her story, her voice steady but filled with quiet joy. Tears filled Alaric's eyes before he even realized what was happening. 3 years. 3 years of silence, of stillness, of believing that this was all there would ever be. And now, this. He pushed the door open slowly, unable to stay hidden any longer. The soft creak broke the moment, and Alara looked up, startled. Their eyes met. For the first time, Alaric truly saw her, not as a staff member, not as a temporary solution, but as someone who had stepped into his world and changed something fundamental. Neither of them spoke. Words felt too small, too inadequate. Instead, Alaric moved closer, his gaze fixed on his son's hand. He knelt beside the bed, his hands trembling as he reached out. The tiny fingers moved again, brushing against his. It was real. In that moment, something inside Alaric broke, and healed, at the same time. The walls he had built over years of grief began to crack, letting in a flood of emotion he had long suppressed. Tears fell freely, unrestrained, as he held his son's hand and felt the faint, undeniable response. Alara quietly stood, giving him space, but her presence remained, a steady, comforting force. That day marked the beginning of a transformation no one could have predicted. Alaric changed, not overnight, not completely, but undeniably. He began spending more time in the nursery, not just standing by the beds but sitting beside them, speaking, reading, even attempting to tell stories of his own. He watched Alara closely, learning from her quiet patience, her unwavering belief. The children's progress remained slow, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But it was there, a slight turn of the head, a deeper breath, a fleeting expression that hinted at awareness. Hope returned, not as a distant dream, but as something tangible, something growing day by day. And with it, Alaric rediscovered something he had lost along the way, his humanity. He began to notice the world outside his empire. The way sunlight changed throughout the day. The sound of laughter in distant rooms. The quiet strength of kindness in its simplest forms. Alara never claimed credit. She continued her work as she always had, focused not on recognition but on the children themselves. But Alaric knew. He knew that what money, power, and expertise had failed to achieve, she had begun to awaken with something far simpler: care, patience, and genuine love. As the months passed, the changes became more visible. The children began to respond more frequently. Their eyes followed movement. Their fingers tightened around hands. Small, fragile steps toward a world they had once left behind. Doctors were astonished. Specialists returned, eager to study what they could not explain. But Alaric no longer sought explanations. He had seen enough. He understood that not everything could be measured, that some things, like hope, like connection, existed beyond the limits of science. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe in the future. If this story has touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, comment, and share it. Stories like these remind us that even in the darkest moments, light can find its way back. Before we reach the end, here's something special for you. Comment below with one word that represents hope for you. Let's fill the comments with positivity and remind each other that kindness still exists in this world. On a bright morning much like the one where it all began, the nursery was no longer a place of silence. It was filled with something new. Life. And as Alaric sat between his children, holding their hands while Alara's soft voice carried another story through the room, he realized something profound. The greatest miracle he had witnessed was not just their movement. It was the return of something he thought he had lost forever. Hope.